Hi everybody, welcome to Afterburner. I'm Bill Whittle. In my opinion, the most tragically mangled aphorism in the English language is, history repeats itself. Well, it does repeat itself in the important ways anyhow. The actors in the cast change, but the characters remain the same and the plot never changes. But the actual quote is so much deeper than that. It's been widely attributed and exists with subtle differences, but it was likely uttered by George Santayana, and it read, "They who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." That's so much more important, that's so much more valuable than history repeats itself because it offers a way out. We're not the victims of an external, immutable cycle of doom. We are the architects of our own demise. Now, I've been reading and then rereading and now reading for a third time William Manchester's remarkable history of Winston Churchill, a 3-volume set called The Last Lion. Now, the first volume, Visions of Glory, tells of Churchill as a young man and has the excitement of the Boer War and life in the trenches during World War I. Volume 3, Defender of the Realm, deals with his ascent into what, in my mind, was his role as the greatest statesman of all time. It, too, is filled with war and conflict and action. But it is the middle volume alone that has me spellbound because as you plow through the 1930s, you see with crystal clarity the making of the catastrophe that you know is coming. That catastrophe, the biggest disaster in human history, World War II, was not only not inevitable, what you discover from remembering the past is that the ascent and success of Hitler was something of a miracle. You discover and then understand more deeply with each heartbreaking page that time and time and time again, this epic catastrophe could have been averted, should have been averted, and would have been averted with what, in the case of the Rhineland crisis, would have been a single French policeman on a bridge. And then, as weakness and the moral cowardice known as appeasement took on a headlong, runaway train life of its own, we see how even trivial shows of resolve would have stopped Hitler every step of the way. In Austria, and most especially in Czechoslovakia, where the brightest men in the most powerful nation on earth made the very same mistakes and for the very same reasons that we are making today. Neville Chamberlain, architect of appeasement, had a plan for the defense of his nation and the greater empire beyond. It was called Plan Z, and it was highly secret. Chamberlain's plan for the defense of his government, his people, his land, and his freedom was actually very simple. In the case of a national emergency of the highest order, the full might of the most powerful empire in history would be aroused and Plan Z would be implemented. Plan Z consisted of the Prime Minister of Great Britain, unannounced and without the usual months of diplomatic protocol, flying to Germany at the 11th hour and speaking to Herr Hitler personally. Personally. You see, once the dictator, a man with legitimate grievances, you understand, badly misunderstood, and ultimately a product of his, Chamberlain's, own government's prior injustices, well, once the dictator had a chance to sit down with Neville Chamberlain personally, once Hitler realized how friendly and sympathetic he was, well, then Hitler would renounce his entire life's philosophy, renounce 2 decades of stated national objectives, renounce all of his and his nation's burning resentment and rage and vanity and aggression. He'd give that all up because Neville Chamberlain would deal with him personally. Neville Chamberlain implemented Plan Z on the eve of the Sudeten crisis in Czechoslovakia. He flew to Munich, sold out his Czech allies, sold out the thousands of Jews and political leaders murdered by the Gestapo, sold out the only nation capable of mounting a solid defense against the Nazis, sold out Great Britain, sold out the 52 million dead that this action would lead to, sold out his honor, his country's honor, sold his very soul, and returned with a piece of paper, a vague agreement of non-binding principles signed by Adolf Hitler, and he hailed that scrap of worthless wood pulp as peace for our time. The arrogance of this, the arrogance of it. The idea that Neville Chamberlain or Barack Obama have such character, such intellect, such force of charm and personality, that simply by making an appearance they can change the vital national interests of real people with real agendas and real national interests antithetical to our own. The raw, naked, narcissistic arrogance of smart diplomacy and reset buttons and shallow, infantile, moral cowards who shirk the monumental burdens of history and cover their cowardice with the fig leaf of being men of peace. Now, throughout the disgusting and disgraceful moral rot of His Majesty's government in the 1930s, one man sat virtually alone in disgrace. Time and time again, he raised his voice to the scattered jeers of an empty House of Commons to warn his people about what, not who, what Adolf Hitler was and what was coming. But the thing that's so fascinating to me is that this man, this one man, was by all accounts one of the most pampered, egocentric, and entitled men ever to walk the earth. At dinner parties, Winston Churchill was really and truly only interested in what Winston Churchill had to say. And yet, it was this egoist, this larger-than-life man, this celebrity that had the fundamental intelligence, humility, and above all else, the love of history to be able to put himself aside and listen to what Adolf Hitler truly said and watch what he really did, instead of hearing and seeing only what men like Chamberlain wanted to hear or see. Churchill, you see, despised intellectuals. He hated them with a burning passion. He hated these slim, smiling, dapper men. Neville Chamberlain's trademark umbrella became, after the shame of Munich, a symbol of appeasement, weakness, and surrender, and he hated their tidy, dapper ideas. He knew, as they did not, that international politics was not a matter of charm or personality. It was and remains a clash of titanic forces masked in diplomatic niceties, a vital national interest in direct opposition, and the only way to victory or even survival was not through charm or finesse, but rather raw, naked force of arms. Churchill knew that Chamberlain's weakness guaranteed the war that he had sought to avoid. We live in dangerous times. They've always been dangerous times. But I have never seen weakness like this advertised on the part of America. Our adversaries have seen this, acted on it, succeeded, and will continue to act on it. Umbrellas and megawatt smiles cannot save us from the consequences of this, and those of us who study the past know it. You know, the only person Adolf Hitler truly feared was Winston Churchill. As long as Churchill was alone, Hitler knew he was safe. When Churchill was brought into the war cabinet, he knew Britain was waking up once again, and when Winston Churchill became prime minister, both Churchill and Hitler knew that only one of them would be standing when it was all over. You know, the Iranians kept American hostages for 444 days while Jimmy Carter was president. They were released within a few hours of Ronald Reagan being sworn in. That is the real-world difference between weakness and strength.